Vote. The yeas are 198, the nays are 226. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Minnesota.
I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
A vote on final passage of a version of the Farm Bill that includes farm programs but not nutrition programs like food stamps. The original Farm Bill that included both failed in the House last month. The bill members are voting on now would change dairy programs, replace direct payments to farmers, and limit those payments. It also repeals a law passed in 1949 setting automatic price supports. Here's what the Associated Press is writing about the bill. House Republican leaders, bruised by the defeat of a massive farm bill last month, are working quickly to revive the measure with a vote on a pared-down version that avoids an immediate showdown on food stamp cuts. Just hours before Thursday's expected floor vote, it was still unclear whether GOP leaders had the 218 votes needed to pass the new measure containing only farm programs. The food stamp part of the legislation will be dealt with separately at a later date. That from the Associated Press.
The yeas are 216, the nays are 208. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the question on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal, which the Chair will put de novo. The question is on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The journal stands approved. Roger, she's all yours.
To seek what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that my name be removed as a co-sponsor from H.R. 2300.
Without objection. Doing good, partner. You doing all right? We live in the greatest country. That's where it starts. Mr. Gentleman from Maryland.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for 1 minute for the purposes of inquiring the Majority Leader the schedule for the week to come.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to my friend, the Majority Leader, Mr. Cantor.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman from Maryland, a Democratic whip, for yielding. Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the House will meet in pro forma session at 10 a.m. No votes are expected. On Tuesday, the House will meet at noon for morning hour, 2 p.m. for legislative business. Votes will be postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Wednesday and Thursday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for morning hour and noon for legislative business. On Friday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. Last votes of the week are expected no later than 3 p.m. Mr. Speaker, the House will consider a few bills under suspension of the rules, a complete list of which will be announced by the close of business tomorrow. The House will also vote to delay for a year both the employer mandate and the individual mandate under Obamacare. As the Speaker knows, the administration declared, and the gentleman knows, the administration declared last week that they would delay the enforcement of the mandate on businesses for a year, but not the mandate on working families and individuals. We will respond next week to correct this injustice. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the House may consider H.R. 5, the Student Success Act, authored by Chairman John Klein. The bill represents a solid, common-sense approach to education to provide our next generation with the education they need to keep America competitive in the world economy. Finally, the House may consider the Department of Defense Appropriations Bill for fiscal year 2014, drafted by Representative Bill Young, for the resources necessary for our troops. And I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his information on the schedule. As the gentleman knows, we just passed a farm bill, and I'm wondering how soon he might expect to move to go to conference on that bill, and I yield to my friend.
I would say to the gentleman, the chairman, the speaker, and other members of leadership are in discussions about how to expedite an agreement on the farm bill. Certainly, it is our intention as well, Mr. Speaker, to act with dispatch to bring to the floor a bill dealing with the SNAP program, that portion of what was traditionally the farm bill. We intend to be bringing that vehicle to the floor at some time in the near future. It is our intention to do so. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for that information. I'm glad to hear that we're going to go to conference as soon as possible so that we can consider that important piece of legislation. Obviously, as this gentleman knows, there are substantial differences between the House and the Senate, and the sooner we get that bill done and whole, I think the better we'll be. You mentioned the Defense Appropriation Bill is coming to the floor. Does the gentleman expect that to be coming to the floor with an open rule? And I yield to my friend.
Mr. Speaker, I would respond to the gentleman. As he knows, this Congress, as has the last, been a Congress as committed to the open process of any in recent history. I would say that the Speaker continues to insist that we strive towards that open process to allow for as much debate and exchange of ideas as possible to benefit for the American people as well as the outcome of legislation. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Was that a yes?
I'll tell the gentleman again, Mr. Speaker, that the Rules Committee, as the gentleman knows, when he was in the position, Majority Leader knows that the Rules Committee will determine the structure of debate. And I would remind the gentleman that the discourse and debate on this floor has been a lot more open than in years past, and would remind him of that. I yield back.
Well, the good news is I don't have time to discuss that today, but perhaps at some time we will. Immigration. Obviously, the Senate, as the gentleman so well knows, has passed a major piece of legislation, passed it 68 to 32. That bill is, I believe, now with us. Can the gentleman tell us when we might be expecting immigration legislation on the floor?
I'd say to the gentleman, it is not correct to say that we have that bill. There was a tax, I believe, that was added to the bill, so we do not have that. And I would say to the gentleman, though, as he knows, our conference members met yesterday to discuss the path forward so far as immigration reform is concerned. I would say to characterize the agreement on our side, we all believe we need to fix a broken system of immigration, and we need to rebuild the trust of the American people in the operation of government in terms of securing our borders and enforcing the law, at the same time balancing that with the tradition and history of our country as one that is built on immigrants. I yield back.
I'm pleased to hear that. Of course, former President George Bush said, as the gentleman knows, just a few days ago, that we have a problem. The laws governing the immigration system aren't working. The system is broken, and he urged us to pass a bill. Chairman of the Budget Committee, Paul Ryan, has said the same thing as I think the gentleman just said. We are very hopeful that we will bring a comprehensive, which we believe is absolutely essential, immigration bill to the floor and to realization so we can fix a broken system and, yes, and give a pathway to citizenship for those who meet the criteria that we would set forth. But I thank the gentleman for his comments, and if he would like to respond further, I will yield. If not, I'll yield back the balance of my time. I yield back the balance of my time.
Purpose, gentleman for Virginia, to seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 10 a.m. on Monday, July 15, 2013.
Without objection, so ordered. The Chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leaves of absence requested for Mr. Horsford of Nevada for today and Mr. Schweikert of Arizona for today after 10:30 a.m.
Without objection, the requests are granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, despite all of the diatribe, all of the allegations, so many of which shocked me, this bill passed, had things in the Farm Bill I was not crazy about. But what an extraordinary day for this reason. Over the last 40, 50 years, members of the other party have increasingly made the United States a welfare state where more and more American people are dependent upon this government for their livelihood. Having been at a Harvard orientation course, I was shocked to have a dean there with the charts that showed that since welfare began, and assistance to single moms for each, a check actually for each child that any woman could have out of wedlock, they would get a check from the government. Now, it was well-intentioned. Back in the 60s, there were deadbeat dads that were not helping with their obligation to help their children. And so the government, people here in Congress thought, wow, why don't we help these poor single moms by giving them a check for each child they have out of wedlock. And at that time, we were around 6–7% of children being born to single-parent homes. And after 40 years, actually after 30 years, as economists will tell you, you will get more of what you pay for. And so we are to date now past 40%, moving toward 50% of children born in America to a single home, single mom home, because we got what we paid for. Now, it doesn't matter how well-intentioned the program was. What I saw happening in the 90s as a judge was single moms coming before me for welfare fraud, and the stories were usually the same that they presented to me, that so often they were bored with high school, and someone said, hey, you can just have a baby and the government will send you a check. And then you can live and you don't have to work, you don't have to finish high school. And those well-intentioned members of Congress back in the 60s ended up, in effect, luring smart young women away from finishing high school into having a child out of wedlock and away from reaching their full potential. Now, even for those of us who are Christians that believe God created the heaven and earth, and that God created at one time a Garden of Eden from which man fell for disobedience, even in that scenario, when the world was perfect, Adam was given a job in a perfect world where everything was fantastic, before childbirth pains, before briars, before thistles, before all the things that frustrate farmers. At that time, he had a job, tend the garden. In a perfect world, people will have a job to reach their God-given potential. And there is a good feeling from doing a good job in what we do. It's one of the things I miss about working in the yard or working out on a farm or working with your hands. When you finish, you see you've done something good. When we work here, we try to do the right thing on both sides of the aisle, but we never know for sometimes decades whether we did more good than damage. And I would humbly submit that the program that began to lure young women away from their potential, away from finishing high school, away from time in college, was well-intentioned, but this government should never be in the business of luring people away from their potential, from luring people into ruts from which they cannot seem to extricate themselves. And they'd come before me for welfare fraud, felony welfare fraud, as a district judge. And normally the scenario was that they realized after a number of children they couldn't live on that little bit of government subsistence, and they would think, well, maybe if I get a job and I don't report it to the federal authorities, maybe I'll finally have enough income that, combined with what the government's given me, then I can get ahead and I can get out of this hole, this rut. And so when the Republicans took the majority in 1995, one of the things that they wanted to do was welfare reform. And I was at that Harvard orientation seminar and was surprised when they brought out the big poster graph of single mothers' income over the 30 or so years since that program had first begun. Single moms' income, when adjusted for inflation over that 30-year period, was flat line. All those years, the average single mom never got ahead. She was flatlined because she was lured into that government program. I'm not sure what the right thing was, but I think it's time to have the debate about it. Certainly, I yield. That's all right, I yield.
In the record by
Please.
unanimous consent. Thank you very much for your courtesy.
You're very welcome. Thank you. So I know that those people that passed the bills in the 60s, they had the best of intentions, but those poor single moms were flatlined for about 30 years of what they were bringing home. That's tragic. I know both sides of the aisle would want them to do better and do well, and every year to do a little better. I know that feeling is on both sides of the aisle, but we disagree with how you get there. But what really shocked me today, and I got to say in some cases broke my heart, is to hear friends talk about how Republicans wanted to take food out of the mouths of children. I would never insinuate or say such a motive on the part of friends across the aisle, even though I believe that that welfare program back from the 60s did exactly that. I would never ascribe that motivation to friends across the aisle because I know that's not their hearts. They really do want to help. They just went about it the wrong way in the 60s. And so in 1995, when Newt Gingrich led the Republican Revolution, had the contract with America, they put in a requirement for work. If you could work, you had to work. And it pushed people who had been subsisting on welfare, barely getting by, it pushed them into the workforce. And this graph about 9 years later showed that single moms' income, when adjusted for inflation after welfare reform, had single moms making more money every year. That graph showed their income went up. And surely that is what both sides of the aisle would want. And when we took up this farm bill today, I voted against it for the first vote previously. But if we are ever going to get down to truly reforming what has become a welfare state that lures far too many people away from the job they could be doing and from the good feeling of actually accomplishing something and the good feeling of knowing you're reaching closer, ever closer to your potential. I was willing to vote for this today because we were going to take the food stamp program out of the agriculture bill. And I don't know what the Senate's going to do, and I can't help what they're going to do. But I know this, today we had a first step in the right direction. And I agreed with my leadership, if you will separate out the food stamp program so that we can have a separate debate on the food stamp program. And even though I don't agree with a number of things in the farm bill we voted on, that was such a big deal. A tremendous stride forward. People said the House nor the Senate would ever separate the food stamp program from the ag bill, because in either the House or the Senate, you had to have them tied together to get enough people from both sides or either side to vote for the bill, because you'd never get enough Republicans by themselves, you'd never get enough Democrats by themselves, and you'd never get enough together unless you put food stamp program with the farm program. But by doing so, it prevented us from looking closely at the farm stamp program, or the farm program, because the food stamp program made 70 to 80% of the budget. And you couldn't look effectively enough at the food stamp program because it was linked with the farm program. This was a big step. And I know there are a number of groups that I thank God for that are doing a great job. And I have friends in these groups, and they've said this was a major mistake today. And I would submit very humbly, hide and watch. This was a first major step. And my goal, and I hope I live to see it, and I hope this country's around long enough that we can do it, is to take every form of public assistance, and put it into one bill in one subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee. And they deal with all welfare, all types of public assistance. And once that happens, we can have major reform. But the reason we have trouble having reform of this ever-growing, ever-bloated welfare state is because the public assistance programs are found throughout all the committees' budgets, throughout all the appropriations. So, if over here in the farm program you say, wait a minute, we need to reform the food stamp program, they go, oh, you hate children. You want to starve children. You want to starve mothers or veterans or military. You must hate all these people. Why? Because they're willing to say things that are not right to come in here and say. And that's what broke my heart today, over and over, hearing people that surely know. I would never want to take food out of the mouth of someone who could not provide for themselves. I don't know any Republican who has ever said that or would ever want that. We want to help people who truly cannot help themselves. And my friend across the aisle, Mr. McDermott, it rules when I made a proposed amendment to separate the food stamp program from the Farm Bill. He said, so do you want to completely eliminate the food stamp program? And I pointed out, no, I did not. Of course, that didn't stop the mainstream press or the left-wing blogs from spouting lies. They're accustomed to that. And God bless them, they have the freedom to do that. They should be able to do that without this administration grabbing up all their phone records. But it was not true, and I pointed out, Mr. McDermott, what was true. No, I don't want to end it. I want to separate it out, and one day I want to have all of the public assistance in one committee where we can see all of the ones that are redundant, those that duplicate services already provided, those where the most waste, fraud, and abuse is taking place. Because the thing we know, we're over $50,000 for every child of debt before they ever even have a chance to start making a living. And we have done that, and it is immoral what we have done to future generations, loading them up with debt just because we can't get to the bottom of waste, fraud, and abuse, get to the bottom of what helps this country more than hurts it. And there will be a price today to pay someday for our negligence. But it's not too late. We can still fix it. But a start happened today. This was a big deal, to separate the food stamp program out so we can look at it. And a good example of what I'm talking about, of how these different types of assistance are spread out through so many different budgets, was pointed out by my good friend Dan Webster from Florida, first Republican Speaker of the House, as I understand it, down in Florida, was reluctant to run, did run, is elected here. He decided to get to the bottom, just one little tiny aspect of this federal bloated bureaucracy. How many federal programs are there that are responsible for getting people to appointments? So far, he says he's found 87 programs responsible for getting people to appointments. And most of them are in the same cities, and most of them have the vans. They're the same size, same kind of vans. And on average, when they do take somebody, they'll maybe average 3 people per trip. Well, when you take up one committee's budget or one appropriations, and you were to take one of those 87 programs and say, you know what, let's combine this with these other programs, then we will hear, as we've heard today, oh, you hate children, or you want to take food from people's mouths. If it's all 87 programs in one bill, then we can come before this body and say, no, we love children. We want to help this country. In fact, we will do more good for children of the future than what you've proposed, because you're loading them up with debt while we lavish it on our generation and going to make future generations pay for lavishing on ourselves. That is just wrong. But if you combine them all into one bill, then we can say, no, we care every bit as deeply and perhaps more than you do, but we don't need 87 programs. We don't need all the duplication. Let's eliminate the redundance. Let's get down to what we really need as a federal government, because this administration was certainly shocked. They talked about all the horrors of cutting the budget with the sequestration. Well, the sequestration made too many cuts in defense. Some were appropriate, but it did some in the wrong places. As I told my leadership 2 years ago this month, you never put your security on the table. You can make cuts, but you never gamble your national security or your home. And my leadership did by putting defense on the table, and I was promised that those sequestration cuts would never happen, and I assured that if that bill were passed, they would happen, and it would be a disastrous mistake, and we would be blamed even though it was the President's idea. It all happened. Sometimes it's just not fun being right. But here today, we did something good. We started a step toward that goal one day of having all the public assistance in one bill, one budget, one committee, where we can get in and analyze without all of the false statements that people are want to make about others wanting to take food from the mouths of children. From my friends saying that we wanted to do that, that I wanted to do that. Come on. Mr. Speaker, that is just wrong. Now, on our side of the aisle, yes, we will complain about Obamacare is going to hurt health care, and we're now seeing that. We're seeing it all play out, just as we said would happen. And no, maybe it wasn't a death panel, call it what you want, but it is a panel under Obamacare that will say, no, you're a little too old. Hey, you've had a good life. Yeah, your hip's killing you. And before Obamacare, you would have gotten a new hip. But now we, the government, say, no, you don't get a new hip. Yes, you could use a new knee, and you might have 20, 25 good years with it. But we're the government, and we say you've had a good knee for long enough, so you're not getting a new knee. Or, as the President pointed out in his town hall meeting, when a woman asked about a pacemaker that her mother had gotten, will you consider the quality of life in deciding who gets a pacemaker and who does not? Since my mother has lived 10 years after getting a pacemaker, I'm concerned she wouldn't get under Obamacare. And he beat around the bush, but then finally said, maybe we're better off telling your mother, just take a pain pill. And that means die without your pacemaker. That's what Obamacare is going to do. But I would never, ever ascribe to any one of my friends across the aisle the intention to want people to die. Well, they might tell me that sometime, but not to the public that they are charged with protecting. Because I don't think they mean to do that. I just think that they're motivated to do the right thing but it's being done in the wrong ways, and people are being hurt. And that's the way we look at it. So today, to hear dozens and dozens of friends across the aisle come up here and try to vilify Republicans, saying we want to take food out of the mouths of children, that this is going to destroy these poor people that can't provide for themselves, and this is what we want to do. Most of those things were said in ways that it would have done no good to ask that their words be taken down, because they would ascribe it to Republicans in general or to a big group, so that you couldn't say that violated the rule of saying a specific person had a specific evil motive. But it was nonetheless just as hurtful. That's apparently the difference. One side is willing to accuse the other of wanting to push Grandma off a cliff and let her die bouncing down a cliff, and the other side, we think you're going to cause Grandma to die early, but we know you don't mean to do that. And in fact, Obamacare will do that very thing because of what we've seen. I'd read that Bette Midler, and I heard Michelle Malkin talking about it, dear friend, that she had tweeted something to the effect that if we had lost the revolution, everyone would have universal health care. Well, I have 3 daughters and a wife that's been married to me, God bless her, help her, for 35 years. 4 women in my life, immediate family. Sometimes, you know, children do things break your heart. Sometimes they bless you beyond anything you could imagine. But if we had England's health care, what I think Ms. Midler didn't understand is they have a 19 to 20% lower survival rate from breast cancer than we have in the United States, because our health care was that much better. And you got treatment that much quicker here. And you didn't have to wait till you felt a lump. You could get a mammogram. There were groups that could help if you didn't have the money. But in England, you had to get on a list for everything you did. And so when you think about 1 in 5 women with breast cancer, if we had England's health care dying, I can't imagine anyone would want England's health care if they realized it means we're going to lose 20% of the women with breast cancer in this country. Now, I've mentioned before, but one of my constituents came from England. She said her mother died of breast cancer because she lived in England and was on list after list to get the diagnostic care to find out if she had cancer, and then when she found it, she went on another list, and it took too long to get surgery, to get help, get treatment, and her mother died, she said, because she lived in England. She said, on the other hand, I'm in America, I'm a secretary here, and I don't have much money, but I'm alive today because when I was found to have cancer, I didn't have to go on a list. I was able to get treatment when I needed it, whether I could afford it or not. And those who yearn for the Obamacare days where we look like England's health care, where we have 20% less survival rate of women we love with all our hearts, like the 4 women in my life. If you got 5 women, which one of them do you want to die so we can have health care like England? The disagreement here on the floor was not about anybody wanting children to not have the food they need, but we have seen the results of welfare reform. And the results of welfare reform in the Republican Revolution of 1995 resulted in single moms having more income after inflation than ever before under the giveaway programs of the Great Society. So in that scenario, who cares more? Those that pushed through the Great Society that lured women into a rut, so many of them they couldn't get out of? Or those who pushed through a bill that forced them to start meeting their potential? I spoke at the oldest college in Tyler, Texas, my home, within the last few months, Texas College. It's a great college. And it changed my opinion about colleges that began as all one race. Now they're all different races, but it's basically an African-American college still today. And the people who are in charge are Christians, and they care deeply. And I spoke to a combined sociology class there at Texas College, and I laid this issue out before them. And as one single mom told me, you got to clean it up. You've got to clean these programs up. I'm now, after so many years later, coming to college to try to better myself. And I wish it had been otherwise, but you need to make people work. You need to make people finish high school, and if they can, have them do some college. You need to incentivize that. You do not need to just give people a check. And she said too many people even spend it on drugs instead of their kids. She said you need to reform this system so that I don't waste years trying to get to college. And others chimed in and they said similar things. And these were people who understand the system better than I do. But as a judge, as a citizen, I've seen it from different angles. And though we care equally on both sides of the aisle, one way leads to the end of a nation. And it's the broad path, and it's wide, because every nation in the history of the world has gone down that path and come to an end. And unless the Lord comes before, we will too. So my goal by running for Congress, the goal of so many people I know here, was to come try to make a difference, to prolong what some called a little experiment in democracy, to prolong what Ben Franklin said, it's a republic, madam, if you can keep it. That's our goal. That's what we hope to do. And I really believe today we made a step in that direction toward reforming the system and starting down the path of eliminating the duplication. And I realize it may not all happen in this farm bill by the time we agree with the Senate. But then we can expose those in the Senate that did not do the right thing. And we can expose those in the House that didn't. And I think it'll end up giving us a majority of those who will do the right thing. Not that everybody doesn't have the right motivation, but we need more who will do the right thing, even under pressure from friends or enemies to do something else. I think we did a good thing today. And with that, I will yield to my friend from Nebraska.
Well, thank the gentleman from Texas. I hate to disturb your train of thought, but if you would allow me for about 3 minutes of commentary, I want to make...
I yield such time as Mr. Portberry may use.
Thank you.
Take all you need.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to add to Mr. Gomer's conversation today, I wanted to add a few words on the Syrian conflict, which has been unfolding with just horrific consequences. In my office this week, I read the accounts about Father Francois Moran, a Franciscan priest who was shot dead in northern Syria by rebels engaged in this Syrian conflict. He was killed in a Christian village where he sought to serve. He did not deserve the death that he was dealt. Mr. Speaker, I just simply firmly believe that the United States Congress cannot allow American taxpayers to become complicit in this killing and the other brutality that is occurring there in Syria. What began as a very hopeful exercise of the Syrian people petitioning their government for redress of grievances and their basic rights has spun into a dreadful civil war with terroristic elements and other rebel groups fighting this brutal Assad regime. But the bloodbath in Syria has spared no one. The regime and many of its rebel opponents have killed wantonly, without discretion, murdering civilians and combatants in life, though not men, not women, or even innocent children have been spared, and no one
there is safe. Now, we have no place imposing our notions of democracy in a place where we cannot distinguish who stands for what. We cannot become complicit in barbaric attacks on civilians. We have no business shipping weapons that could end up in the hands of those who would raid convents and murder innocent people. Neither America nor Syria can possibly be served by this. Now, Mr. Speaker, true to our principles, the United States remains the largest donor of humanitarian assistance to the people of Syria, with a total of more than $800 million given since this conflict began in the spring of 2011. And that's where our efforts belong. Mr. Speaker, I think Father Moran, who I referenced earlier, that would probably be the outcome that he would want to see. Humanitarian help, giving people some hope, possibly even stopping the shipment of arms into that country. That would be a legacy worthy of his sacrifice. 100,000 persons have died, Mr. Speaker. No U.S. military engagement in Syria. I thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding.
A wonderful point. I know that there are people on both sides of the aisle who are motivated, again, by doing the right thing. But when you know that you have a tyrant on one side in charge of the country, and you know that now, perhaps it would have been different if we'd gotten in earlier, but at this point, Al-Qaeda or the most radical Islamists, brutal killers, are driving the rebel side. There is no good reason for this country to spend any blood nor any treasure to get in the middle of that conflict. And I appreciate so much my friends pointing that out. And it points to the problem in the Middle East with regard to the American position. This president had his administration help the rebels in Libya when we knew, hey, people were saying it right here. There are Al-Qaeda. We know there are Al-Qaeda supporting the rebels. We're not sure how extensive it is, so let's get to the bottom of it before you just launch in and eliminate Gaddafi, because Gaddafi was giving us more information on terrorist elements in the world than most anybody but our best friend Israel. He was being helpful. And though he had blood on his hands for which he should have paid, you have to choose between the lesser of two evils. And as Secretary Gates said at the time, there is absolutely no United States security interest, national security interest at stake in this Libya crisis, in the rebellion. And yet this president went headlong. And when you know, as one Egyptian paper reported, bragging, they have 6 Muslim Brotherhood members that advise this administration, and there are a lot more people sympathetic to Muslim Brotherhood that advise this administration than that. And when you know that that is going on, then it makes sense. They're going to make stupid decisions. They're going to always, like they did in Egypt, say, well, let's rush in and help, even though it allows the Muslim Brotherhood to take over Egypt. And that's why so many, I've heard so many people say, you know, they've talked to people from Egypt who've said, we don't want the radical Islamists in charge. We don't want the Muslim Brotherhood. We don't want them in charge. We want a moderate Muslim government so that we can live in peace and not tyranny, like Afghanistan did under the Taliban. And now, to the disgrace of this nation, the greatest nation in the history of the world, this administration is about to leave Afghanistan, which we should have done probably in 2002, but now we're about to leave it in the hands of the Taliban. If we had left in 2002, the Taliban had been totally destroyed. They were gone. The people that were members were in such disarray, they did not have any real presence in Afghanistan. Why was that? It wasn't because tens of thousands of American troops went into Afghanistan and wiped out the Taliban. No, it was because of the heroic sacrifices of those within the tribal groups called the Northern Alliance at that time. General Dustin led those troops, and the United States provided less than 500 special ops intelligence people in Afghanistan and provided them air cover, gave them some weapons, and they routed the Taliban within a matter of 3 or 4 months. In the last famous battle, with General Dustin leading these Northern Alliance tribesmen on horseback with weapons, riding uphill into the strong area where the Taliban was located, with bullets, RPGs flying all around them, killing many on horseback, but they never stopped, and they went up there to the fortress and they defeated the Taliban. And now this administration says, as a result of how forceful those Northern Alliance were in defeating the Taliban, well, those are war criminals. No, they know how to fight the Taliban. Clearly we don't, because the Taliban has come back. And I would submit that this administration releasing Taliban leaders to go back and be in charge is not a good thing, because we had 4 Americans that were killed at the same time this administration was pleading, oh, please, please, come talk to us. You don't have to have any preconditions, just talk to us. We look weak because this administration gives every appearance of being weak, because it's getting terrible advice. In that part of the world, they don't understand turn the other cheek. As Christians individually, individuals of us here that are, you are to turn the other cheek. But as a government official, you provide for the common defense. And you make sure if others do evil to people in this country or to threaten this country, that they are punished, because the government is not given the sword in vain. And people misunderstand that and think, oh, if we apologize enough for all of the Americans who have laid down their lives, not for some great empire, but for other nations to continue to speak their language, to continue to have their own identity, and to continue to have freedom that was taken away. This country has sacrificed for freedom like no one in the history of the world. In the past, there was some selfish, very selfish motivation. Our selfish motivation has normally been that we want these people to be freer so that we can be friends and freedom will be catching. But as we've seen, if you are not educated in how to sustain a democratic republic where you actually could govern yourself, if you do not understand how to do that, you will lose it. And we've watched in Turkey, which after Ataturk made those great changes to the government. Yes, Islam is the most widespread religion in Turkey, but it was a secular government where other people could also worship. And we see that being removed little by little in Turkey. And I hear from Turkish friends who are frightened of what's happening. And now this government our government seems to be on the wrong side in each of these disputes. We're out there trying to work with the Taliban while they're killing Americans. Shouldn't that at least be one precondition? Would you stop killing our American soldiers that are training your farmers, training your government officials? Could you stop killing them long enough to have our talk? Because what needs to be done is, you kill an American, we're going to wipe out a whole bunch of your folks, because we are about protecting ourselves. And I still feel guilty for 1979 being in the United States Army when we were attacked, it was an act of war against our embassy in Tehran, and we looked weak to the world. And it's still used as a recruiting tool. Forget Abu Ghraib, the best recruiting tool is the way we left Vietnam, the way we did nothing to avenge or even to truly get our people out of Tehran after that act of war. And I love the leadership of Ronald Reagan, but in 1983 he had a Democratic Congress, and people that worked with him, when I blamed him for withdrawing from Beirut after attack, that showed weakness. They said the Democrats made clear he didn't have a whole lot of choice. But that gave a sign of weakness. USS Cole, we basically did nothing. Nobody paid as they should have. And if we're going to protect this nation, we have to take care of things at home. Stop all the waste, fraud, and abuse so that people who truly need help get it. And those who can work have the opportunity to work, not with some do-nothing government program, but with a real job where you make real money and you accomplish real things. Because one other thing that Obamacare is doing is a disaster to our American friends. I've been told by people, look, I used to work full-time at McDonald's, and now because of Obamacare they cut me to part-time, so now I don't have the benefits I had before, and I have to go back and forth between Burger King or Arby's and McDonald's because everybody's cutting to part-time because of Obamacare. Regardless of the incentives for passing the bill, regardless for all the desire people express about giving people better health care, they're having worse lives. It's the slowest recovery, the worst recovery in American history other than from the Great Depression. And like Morgenthau, the Secretary of the Treasury, said in 1940 in his own handwriting, he said, we have spent more money than anyone in history trying to end the Depression, and we've created nothing but debt. No better off. They were no better off. And it was not until World War II began and we got drawn into that by Pearl Harbor being bombed and seeing liberty under attack for our European friends. We got drawn into it, and then the government started doing their number one job, provide for the common defense, and lo and behold, we came out of the Depression. The government did the most important thing for it to do, provide freedom, protect Americans so they can grow the economies, so they can be entrepreneurs. When the government does the most important job, provide for the common defense, it ended the Great Depression. And now we have people in government that think, though they may not have ever been successful in business, that they can tell people who have been and who are how to run their business so much better, and it's hurting this economy. Oh, not with companies like General Electric, those who've gotten plenty of crony capitalist help. And I would also advise those who don't want to see reform of welfare that I think can only occur when we get all public assistance in one appropriation, in one committee. Then we can get real reform, and we will save so many billions and billions and billions, heck, maybe trillions of dollars over a 10-year period. We'll save so much money that they'll be able to throw it away on many more, thousands of cylinders. They can have all kinds of crony capitalism if, with the money that we can save by providing incentives to get back to work, by providing incentives to finish high school and to go to college if you need to. But not everyone needs to go to college. You don't have to get a college degree to learn how to weld. I was over in Marshall at the TSTA facility, the institution there. They're teaching welders and they're making great money when they leave. And it's true of other institutions that teach those kind of vocational training. But instead, we now have more people on food stamps than ever in history. What has happened to this country when those of us who want to get the country back running by reforming welfare are vilified and accused of wanting to take food out of the mouths of children? How wrong that is. We want more children with more food. The same way I've been vilified for saying children need to be taught English. Even if they're just newly arrived from Mexico, teach them in English. Maybe they need some beginner courses to get them there. But don't teach them in Spanish. Help them move into English. Why? Not because I or people like me hate those Hispanic children. It's because we love them. And we know that if you teach them in English, as my friend Commissioner Ramirez, former city councilman Ramirez said, his parents from Mexico said they couldn't speak English at home. His father said, you can be anything in America you want to be, but you've got to speak good English. And it was true. And I am thrilled to death that Gus's new restaurant in Tyler is working out so well. But he wasn't allowed to speak Spanish at home, and the sky's the limit. And for someone born in this country, they can be president of the country. Instead of being a manual laborer speaking Spanish, they can be president of the company. So who really cares more about people? Those who rail against us, who want to reform the entitlements we're told they are. They were supposed to be a hand up, not bait to be lured into a rut they could not get out of. That is immoral. And I know for some people, Star Parker, there are others who talk about how they have pulled themselves up. They're an inspiration. But there are too many that did not have the ability to pull themselves up or the wherewithal. And shame on us for luring them into a rut they couldn't get out of. It's time to reform that. But I can also say, as the attacks on the Christian religion have grown and grown exponentially, this country is in deeper and deeper trouble and will continue to be. The assault and the intolerance upon Christianity is incredible. People came to this country in the early days, founders. Columbus, when he discovered, he didn't know he was in a new country or a new continent. He thought he'd found a new way to Asia, but he claimed the land for his king and queen and also his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And he wrote in his own journal, it was the Lord that put it into his mind that he could sail west and get to the east. And it was the Holy Spirit that comforted him all the way. And you look at George Washington's writing, the father of this country, without whom there would be no country today as we know it. A noble, honorable, honest man. Faults, yes. And this country didn't begin to start really reaching its potential until we dealt with the blight of slavery and the horror that was in America. It's not been any kind of blot on our soul like slavery in American history until we started killing babies. Slavery had to go. And after we did away with slavery and more people were encouraged to be entrepreneurs, and we came into the 1900s and we still needed a civil rights movement to set things straight, and Christian leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., who'd studied the Bible and wrote touching things like those letters from the Birmingham jail. They knew Christ was their salvation, and they knew they were supposed to ensure that brothers and sisters treated brothers and sisters as such. There were vile Christians But I would submit those weren't really Christians. They didn't understand Jesus' teaching. But it was the church that was behind the revolutionary movement. It was the church that was strongest behind the abolition movement. It was Christian leaders who were strongest behind the civil rights movement. And now this nation, our government at least, seems to be at war with Christianity. We can have a little group complain that, oh, we didn't feel comfortable in the military because of the prayers that were said or crosses worn or things that were said about Christianity. So we have examples of someone being told you can't give someone a Bible when they need one because you may be prosecuted or thrown out of the military. Under the rules some are trying to push through, you have a dying friend that asks you, is there a God? And under the order some would have, you couldn't even tell them what you know with all your heart. It's gotten to be a problem. I love Ronald Reagan's quote back in 1984. He said, the frustrating thing is those who are attacking religion claim they're doing it in the name of tolerance, freedom, and open-mindedness. The question isn't the real truth they are intolerant of religion. They refuse to tolerate its importance in our lives. The teachings of Jesus would allow people to make whatever choices they wish. Choose not to believe in God. Choose to be an atheist. Choose to be an agnostic and say, I just don't think there's enough evidence. Choose to be a Buddhist. Choose to be a Muslim. Because all children are acceptable in God's eyes. But I believe God's will is not for any to stumble, that they will all come to eternal life. But the war that's been declared, as it appears to be, the gloves are off against Catholicism, there's a form of Christianity, all these different religious beliefs, against abortion, those who have beliefs religiously against birth control, those who have beliefs about marriage being what it has been for most of the world's history, and without which marriage between men and women, we would not have had the future generations and even exist today. And you say, I support that traditional marriage, and now you're to be drummed out of your job, drummed out of having friends, eliminated from the public sector. Ronald Reagan was right. The real intolerance, the real hatred is from those who choose to impose their beliefs, force them onto others. Mr. Speaker, today still nonetheless was a good day. We made a big move toward what will one day, if we're faithful, allow us to take some of the burden that we have been putting on future generations. And the 50,000 or so we've already humped onto the backs, shoulders of children that don't have jobs yet. We made a first step toward the day when we can reform them, we can start encouraging people to their God-given potential instead of luring them into ruts. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
From where? For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Do now.